Mr. President, I come to the floor deeply disappointed, like many, over our failure to seize a unique opportunity to put America on a more fiscally sane path for the future. My number one priority for this year, I've talked about it so many times, and not only publicly, but with colleagues in intense discussions for now nearly a year. That number one priority has been to advocate for a deficit reduction package that would be deemed credible and would put us on a path to fiscal stability. And I think given the situation that exists around the world today, nothing could have been more impactful in a positive way than doing so. Financial experts agreed, and they have for now years, that we're on the wrong path, that we are spending far too much in relationship to our anemic growth of GDP, that we've staggered along here for 3 years and yet spent an extraordinary amount of money without seeing the economy recover. A number of plans have come forward. Simpson-Bowles was promoted as one of those bold types of plans that could help get us back on this fiscal path to prosperity. As you know, Mr. Bowles was the former chief of staff to our former president, Bill Clinton, and our former colleague, Alan Simpson, put together a package that, whether or not you agreed with it, all of it, certainly you could not disagree that this was something that didn't put us on the path that we needed to go. Yet that was rejected out of hand by the White House and others. We've seen the activities and presentations of the Gang of Six, 40-plus senators, including me, joined together in a bipartisan way to urge the president to join us in coming forward with a bold, comprehensive plan. That was rejected. The president's budget was laughed out of this chamber. Not one person, either Democrat or Republican, voted for it. We came far short in August of what we needed to do. I wasn't able to support that particular plan. It did avert a debt limit increase crisis. Nevertheless, that opportunity, which we had with a involvement of both parties to do something truly significant, that was passed over. And so it then fell to the committee of 12, which was called the Supercommittee. And many of us, most of us, had input into that in terms of suggestions and what we urged those members to do, and to at least reach the minimum of $1.2 trillion of deficit reduction over a 10-year period of time. And there was a so-called draconian sequester or across-the-board cut that would go into place automatically starting in 2013 if they couldn't come to agreement. And the consensus at the time was this was so draconian that it would force an agreement and a coming together of Republicans and Democrats, 6 of each, 6 from the House, 6 from the Senate, to come forward with at least a minimal plan. Many of us were urging them to do much more. To bring forth something that would be credible with the investment community and restore confidence that America understood the dire situation we were in, and we were doing something about it as representatives of the people. No clearer message came to this body than the message sent in November of 2010 with a historic turnover of members and an outpouring of support for putting the future of our country, our fiscal future and economic future and future for our children and grandchildren ahead of politics. And yet it is politics that defeated the effort. Now, it's easy to blame the committee of 12. I know there was an earnest attempt to come together, and politically, perhaps it was doomed from the start just by the way it was designed. At least I thought that way in August, and was one of the reasons I voted against that proposal. Nevertheless, they made an earnest attempt. Unfortunately, we're not able to bring it home. And so responsibility falls not just on those 12, but it falls on this entire Congress. Because we wouldn't even have gotten to that super committee of 12 if we had done our job earlier and presented in August when we were bumping up against a debt limit extension, doing what I think most of us intuitively and understand needs to be done. And yet the political considerations and ramifications were such that we came forward with a very timid and woefully short plan of what we needed to do. The president has to take some responsibility. You can't really bring forward a bold change in the way the U.S. government does business unless you have bipartisan support. And you really can't get that bipartisan support unless the chief executive, the number one, the quarterback of the team, stands up and says, I want to be involved and engaged and stay engaged. And while there was some rhetoric coming out of the White House, there was no plan. As I said, the budget plan was rejected on a unanimous vote. President's budget plan, unanimous vote. Republicans and every Democrat turned it down. The president said some nice words about what we needed to get going and so forth and so on, but he was AWOL. As I said, the quarterback of the team needs to be engaged. I mean, he's the key person. And yet, that quarterback was not on the field. So Congress, the White House, I think some responsibility falls on outside groups who distorted what we were trying to do, who mischaracterized what Republicans were seeking to accomplish, and there was some mischaracterization of what Democrats were seeking to accomplish. But it was an undermining process. Those groups that are supposedly representative of seniors across this country is shameful way in which they distorted the message and what we were trying to do. And obviously it had a political impact here and put restraint on members because their base was being told that they were lied to in terms of what was under consideration and what we were trying to do. We all know the Social Security and Medicare are going to not have the funds available in the future to provide the services that were promised to the American people. And yet any attempt to try to salvage and save and retain those programs' solvency, the message that went out from these groups that supposedly represent the interests of our seniors was such that, no, we were trying to take away their program. We were trying to destroy their program. I mean, how ridiculous it is that someone's going to come in here and say, my goal is to destroy retirement benefits for the American people, or I'm here to take away health benefits for American retirees. None of us are here for that purpose. These programs are in law, they are in place. We want them to be more efficient, more effective, but more importantly, we want them to remain solvent. And yet outside groups were basically sending just the opposite message. And so we failed. We came up short. But having done so, we cannot avoid the responsibility that we continue to have to do everything in our power to try to address a very serious fiscal problem that exists in this country. Years and years, decades and decades, not only this Congress, but former Congresses, not only this president, but former presidents have made promises to the American people which we are unable to keep because we are unable to sustain the fiscal capability of doing so. We haven't had a budget come out of the Congress in more than 1,000 days. There's some indication that we will have a budget next year, and I sincerely hope that we can get together and come forward with a deficit reduction budget, one that recognizes the fiscal plight that we're in. And I'll work with both sides of the aisle to try to accomplish that. We have to acknowledge that we continue to spend trillions of more dollars than we have available to us. No nation can sustain that. All you have to do is look across the Atlantic at what's taking place in Europe and country after country after country. It's not just Greece. It's not just Portugal. It's not just Ireland anymore. It's Italy and maybe France and maybe other countries. The European Union is staggering going forward to try to address a serious problem, the same type of problem that we have here. So the focus is there, and we look and say, oh, well, they need to get their act together. Well, we need to get our act together because what we're seeing there may be coming across the shore here, and certainly the same principles in place. Promising more than you can deliver, borrowing more than so that you can pay debts that you don't have the money to pay for through the revenues that you generate in your country. The same thing is happening. And so all of this in front of us, seizing the opportunity to do something for the future of this country, our generation, the next generations, for the sake of the country, we need to continue the process and go forward. It's easy to sit around and grumble and blame somebody else and say, well, we gave it our best shot and therefore we'll just let happen what happens. We don't want to do that, because what will happen here if we continue on the course that we're on is what is currently happening in Europe. And there's no clearer picture of the consequences of a sovereign nation promising more and spending more than it takes in over time. It slows the economy, it piles up the interest payments, it shrinks the amount of money available for essential services, and it puts the programs that were in place in real jeopardy. So if we look at that, we clearly have to answer the question, where do we go from here? And how do we go forward in a constructive way? I would suggest a few things. First, we need to enforce the law that's there. The law that is in place, on the books now. Even though I believe that law designs a process that is woefully short of where we need to go, at least it is a step in the right direction, and we need to enforce that. No one wanted to get to this across-the-board cutting, this sequester that impacts our national security, particularly, and other functions of government. That was supposed to prevent us from, or provide a basis for us to come to agreement. It didn't. But that now is the law. And attempts to undo that, I think, is one of the most cynical things we could do. And the American people know it. And I don't believe they'll allow us to do it. So the law needs to be enforced in terms of the minimal amount of cuts that we've already agreed to need to take place, and we need to go forward and do that. So there are a number of ways, and I commend the committee for at least trying to come up with some efficiencies and effectiveness in our federal spending process, and that they have, I believe they have a list of things that we can look to in order to enforce more cuts. I have suggested a triage process when we review every aspect of an agency of government, every function that's performed with this, through this federal government, and basically say we've got a patient here that's sick, a patient here with a potentially terminal disease, but we need to triage, and we got a bunch of people in the waiting room. Some of them need attention right away. And so triaging results in every agency, every function, every expenditure being examined from the standpoint of, is this absolutely essential to the future of this country, to the protection of our citizens? Is this an absolutely essential function of government that can't be done at the state level, at the local level, or at the private level? And if so, then that needs to have priority. Secondly, there's a whole range of issues. We come down here every day with new ideas and thoughts of nice to do, but we can't afford to do. And we have to postpone those, or just simply say to people, I'm sorry, we don't have the money to do it. And if we don't have the money to do it, we shouldn't do it now. So we separate the essential from the like to do, it can't do, and then we look at what do we really need to do that someone else can do better. Whether it's in the private sector, whether it's at the state level, whether it's at the local level, there's a whole range of things where the federal government has gotten way in over its head. And these are functions and things that can take place through the private sector or through state and local governments that we don't need to do. We can look at the duplication and inefficiencies that exist here. Senator Coburn came up with a long list, trillions of dollars of expenditures that could be saved. We ought to look at that. We ought to look at those and decide which ones we want to go forward with and how we can start that process. He talked about duplication. Just let me mention a couple things here. 18 separate domestic food assistance programs. Do we need a domestic assistance for food? Oh, probably there's some areas where we do. Do we need 18 separate programs doling this out? 47 different job training programs. Okay. The economy is restructuring. We need job training. Do we need 47 separate programs to do that? And my personal favorite, 56 financial literacy programs. You could argue that the federal government is in no place to have one financial literacy program in place to go out and teach the American people how to be financially literate. I think what we need to do is be financially literate here and then use that model to show people how to be literate rather than simply saying, well, we've got the answer. We obviously don't have the answer, and why we have 56 financial literacy programs in place through this federal government is just astounding. So these are suggestions, and there's many others regarding cutting of spending. But there are other functions here that need to be addressed in three major categories. One is regulatory reform. It's costing the American taxpayer and Americans millions and billions of dollars of regulatory measures that are coming out of the various agencies without a solid cost-benefit basis attached to it, without solid assessments based, and there's a process underway to look at those. That's one category. I could talk a long time about that. I won't. A second one is entitlement reform. Now, I've been talking about that from the beginning. This is the engine that drives the train of deficit. And we can either stand by and continue to lie to the American people and say, you've got nothing to worry about. We're going to preserve every penny of the Social Security program and every penny of the Medicare and Medicaid programs. It'll always be there for you. Don't worry. Even the money that you put in payroll taxes and so forth, it's all sacrosanct and don't worry about it. We can continue that lie, or we can tell them the truth. And that is, if we want to keep these programs viable, we need to take structural reform measures now. That could be increasing the age of eligibility for Medicare to coincide with the age that is currently available for Social Security. That could be changes in some of the indexes that are used to calculate the cost of living adjustments. That could be changed, that could be modified through means testing. Warren Buffett says he doesn't need Social Security, fine. If people in that category don't need Social Security or Medicare or at least the full payment, let's give them back what they paid in. But as most people don't understand, the average American is receiving 3 times as much in their lifetime as from what they paid in as to what they are receiving. So we could put some means testing in there. We need to debate and talk about this. Politically sensitive? Sure. But let's be honest with the American people. They want us to be honest. I think that's what the message of 2010 was all about. And the third category, one in which I've been very involved in, is reforming our tax code, which is a mess. It's a complexity that's totally incomprehensible to anybody who spends less than 15 hours a day as a career studying the tax code and trying to figure out how all these things work together. It's a nightmare. Americans spend billions of dollars paying people to do their taxes because they can't figure it out themselves. There's a complexity after complexity and thousands and tens of thousands of pages in this tax code. There is a consensus that we need to reform our tax code. And it's a bipartisan consensus. Senator Wyden and I have a bill. It has been worked on for 3 years. It is not the absolute answer to everything, but it's in text, and it's been scored, and it's available to be a base of which to go forward on. And I know that the Supercommittee looked at that. And I think the Ways and Means Committee and the Finance Committee ought to look at that. Tax reform can produce revenues for this country and growth for this country, which will give us a growing economy, a growing GDP, and help with our fiscal situation. Mr. President, I sense that I'm close to or running out of time, and in deference to my colleagues, let me just wrap up if I could. I came here deeply disappointed. I remain deeply disappointed that we haven't been able to do more. My number one priority has been to advocate for going big. We weren't able to do that. Experts agree we must do more. All we have to do is look at Europe to see what's coming next. Let's try to avoid that. There are plans out there that we can build off of. So instead of just folding our tent and saying there's nothing we can do except waiting for the election results of 2012 and maybe we'll have a different president or a different Congress or whatever, we have a responsibility to act and to act now. There are ways we can do this. We need to demonstrate to ourselves and to the American people that we will take up the responsibility. I choose to do that. I choose to make the tough decisions. I choose to take the tough medicine. for the future of this country, and I believe the American people choose also. And with that, I urge my colleagues to join me as we go forward to finishing out this year and going forward in the year ahead, not sitting back and waiting for election results. Let's do something now, because the urgency and the crisis is now, and it needs to be addressed. Let's be responsible, step up and do it. Mr. President, with that, I yield back.